Before we jump into this episode, I want to remind you that while Caitlin and Sophia are dietitians, we're not your dietitians. This means the information shared in the Food Freedom Fertility podcast is intended to entertain, educate, and inform. It is not a substitute for medical care. This information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making any changes.
Welcome to the Food Freedom Fertility podcast. We are doing our summer season of mini-sodes, and I'm in my regular working room, which you don't see much on the podcast because I have a family living in this house, and the door in here is like one of those, here, I'll turn it so you can see. It's one of those like sliding barn doors, and so it's not very soundproof, and so I never record down here unless my house is empty because everybody in my house is so loud, so usually I'm in the guest room, but here I am. I've got a nice little plant here and a wind chime. This came from Olivia from Your Fertility, Your Future, who we've had on the show, friend of the pod. But today we are here not just to talk about the space in which I'm recording. We are talking about some really popular trends in the wellness space, and that is cold plunging in hot saunas. Are these good for your fertility or not, and why? So I have scoured the internet as of lately. I went on Google Scholar and looked for some peer-reviewed articles about these topics. And lo and behold, you're never going to believe this. Brace yourself, listeners. Women haven't really been studied. I know. A shock, isn't it, that women haven't really been studied? So basically the things that have been studied that I saw was studies on mice, which you're not a mouse, but we'll talk about that anyway. And studies that are done including women, but like very small sample sizes. And I don't really know if we can derive a whole lot of real good data from that. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through what I saw and give you like my hot takes as a dietitian who has worked with a lot of women. So starting off with cold plunges. So this is an interesting topic for me because I went to Bastyr University, which is a naturopathic medical school, and the founder, John Bastyr, was asked if he could only choose two modalities, I guess, like, two therapies, what would he choose? And he said his own two hands, so doing like manual manipulation on people's bodies to help them heal. And the other was hot and cold water. So submerging somebody in hot water or cold water and like different temperatures depending on what it is exactly that they need. Those were his two preferred medicines. So it was kind of cool looking this up and going through the research because hot and cold temperatures is kind of what we're looking at here. So starting with the cold plunges, I looked at a couple different articles and we can link them in the show notes. But in reality, pretty much what I saw was that when it comes to a cold plunge, women see about a 400% increase in cortisol when they are submerged in cold water. Now, the subjects in this research, they were submerged in water that was around 5 degrees Celsius, sometimes like 8 up to 10 or even 14 degrees Celsius. And they were submerged like up to their neck. So they kept their head out of the water. And the time varied for each study, but it was around the 5-minute mark. So you're submerged in pretty damn cold water for about 5 minutes. So that's what we're looking at here. And that's what showed the 400% increase in cortisol. However, that only lasted for about 35 minutes. After 35 minutes, levels returned to normal. What we did see in the differences between men and women is that men lost heat a lot faster, but they also recovered their heat a lot more quickly. So this is just men being more vascular, having more muscle mass, having more surface area. They're just generally bigger with less fat than women. So they lose their heat more quickly, but then they recover that heat again more quickly. Women take longer to get that core temperature down and then longer for it to raise again. And men actually showed a bigger stress response in the cold water than women did. So their cortisol levels went up actually even higher than that 400% as compared to women. So men have a significantly larger cortisol response to the pain. So this is sort of like measuring the pain of being in cold water. But what does this really mean for your hormones? Like, we just don't really know. I tend to think, as a dietitian who works with women all the time, that more cortisol isn't really a good thing. Now, as far as physiological benefits, they aren't extremely measurable. Basically, what we see is that having any sort of like pain or difficulty and then overcoming it gives a larger sense of drive and purpose and a decrease in overall anxiety for anyone. So it really seems like, according to these articles that I read, that symptom relief is the biggest benefit observed. And that's sort of like people writing down what they were feeling before starting the plunges and how they felt afterwards. It seems like anxiety is one of the biggest things that feel more like relieved by cold plunging, but that we don't see any like super measurable effects. So, what we haven't studied is what is the composition of your follicular fluid if you are cold plunging? Is it better because you're like making your body colder and more resilient, or is it worse because we're seeing such big cortisol spikes? I mean, it's not bad to have your cortisol go up as long as it comes back down, right? And that's what we see in this study, is that cortisol tends to return back to normal around like the 35-minute mark after the plunge. It doesn't stay elevated like all day, every day. And I can see why people would feel good after a cold plunge. I really can, because some of us really love the feeling of high cortisol. And I know that might seem like kind of a slap in the face, but so many of us have been running on cortisol for so long that it's almost like addictive. Like, it feels good to have coffee for breakfast and go hit a fasted workout, right? Who hasn't felt like jazzed off of that? It's almost like a stimulant drug where you feel really like so capable and so strong, and you can go and do this because you're running on pure cortisol. And if you're somebody who has conditioned themselves to really like that response in your brain, it's sort of, the female athlete, the person that is like the high achiever. These are the people that we see buying the cold plunges and like doing this in their backyard. It's hardly like Miss Couch Potato who you see going out into the snow and jumping through a hole in the frozen lake. So I don't know. That's very observational and very subjective. It wasn't written specifically in the literature. So I don't really know what to tell you about that. Next is hot saunas. How do these hot saunas impact your fertility? Hey, podcast listener, we are taking a break from this episode to talk about our sponsor for this summer season, and that is, of course, Tempdrop. It has been no secret on this podcast for many years that Caitlin and I love Tempdrop, specifically because it measures your basal body temperature while you are still sleeping. This is so key to anybody who is, one, like me, and forgets to take their temperature in the morning, and two, who wakes up at inconsistent times. When you are manually using a basal body temperature thermometer, like one that you'd find at the drugstore or buy online, you have to take your temperature at the exact same time every morning. This is great if you have a really predictable schedule and you always know what you're up to. You wake up at the same time every day without fail. This is not great for those of us who maybe are trying for a second or a third baby and are already waking up in the night with our existing children. And so, when exactly was our temperature the lowest and which one are we counting as our wake up? This is also not great if you are a shift worker or if your schedule shifts even slightly. I'm talking about a 15-minute difference in when you wake up is going to skew your basal body temperature. That is why we love the Tempdrop on this podcast. It is such an easy and simple way to automate your fertility awareness method, regardless of your unique journey. It is great for if you have a irregular cycle, like if you have PCOS or you're recovering from hypothalamic amenorrhea and you want to know when and if you're ovulating at all and you don't have like a super consistent chart to start with. And it is great for anybody who just wants one less thing to think about. Tempdrop does not rely on your memory. It relies on science-backed data that is always improving and always growing and is truly the highest quality. Tempdrop is committed to supporting individuals with connecting with their bodies. They support to make things more accessible rather than replacing existing methods. Tempdrop is here to make what you're already doing easier. So if you want to try out Tempdrop and sort of automate your fertility awareness temperature taking, use code FFF15 at checkout at tempdrop.com. So the main article that I read about this was from Finland, which is like big sauna town. Everybody loves saunas in Finland. They pronounce it like sauna. They love it. If you've even watched, you know what? Even in the movie Frozen, people are in the sauna in there. Remember that scene? If you have small children already, you probably know what I'm talking about. Okay, so what we saw mainly in this study was that being in the sauna, so ladies in this sauna were in there for 30 minutes each, and it was around 175 degrees inside the sauna. So it was hot, 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 hot. And it was a long exposure, 30 minutes at 175. That's for real. So even just one sauna session, so going into that hot sauna for 30 minutes, we saw a huge increase in cortisol, in adrenaline, in prolactin, which is not so good because those of us with endometriosis and PCOS, we tend to already have really high prolactin. And it showed that basically high heat and prolonged exposure is a very potent physiological stressor. However, we saw after 2 weeks of repeated use in this sauna that the lady's stress response to the heat became a lot less pronounced. It's sort of like their body got used to this and they didn't have such a huge response to it over time. So, what does this tell us about the sauna? Basically, it is a big stress on your body. Cold plunging, similarly, a stress on your body. Stress is not inherently bad. Some of us maybe need a bit more of these hormones. I don't really know. We certainly need more resilience to these hormones. So that's the piece that really gets me thinking when it comes to cold plunging and sauna is we cannot remove all stress from our lives when we're trying to conceive. Believe me, I've tried. We have to still exist within this world. We can't just go to a resort somewhere and neglect everybody and everything and not deal with a single thing that brings us any stress. That is not a way to live. It's not realistic. Our society would collapse. Our loved ones would greatly suffer. And ultimately, we would greatly suffer as well. We'd miss out on so much of life because with stress, with great risk comes great reward. And there's a lot in life that's won through stressful situations. So the goal is not to avoid all stress. The goal is to become more resilient to that stress. So that's the one promising piece that I take away from reading this research and looking at all of this is that more stress in the short term we do know can make it more difficult to ovulate. We do know can impact all of your hormones, but it doesn't seem like this is very permanent. Like you don't raise your cortisol, raise your adrenaline, raise your prolactin, and then it just stays high for weeks and weeks. It's that it goes up during the exposure and then comes back down afterwards with women becoming more resilient to these shifts the more frequently they plunge in sauna. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. So now we're going to get to the point where we're talking about my hot take. Okay. So whether I think you should be doing this or not doing this. This is what I have observed when it comes to cold plunging and hot saunas for women. Cold plunging, we tend to take it to the extreme. Like I said before, like drilling a hole in the frozen lake and getting in it for 5 full minutes, up to 14 minutes in some of these studies. That is extreme. And that is going to really raise your stress hormones quite a bit. They're not going to stay raised forever, but it's going to raise them. What I have been seeing emerge, and I didn't have like a peer reviewed article to show, it was more like a Mel Robbins podcast with an expert and just sort of the murmurings I've heard from other dietitians and people in this realm is that you don't need the water to be freaking bejesus cold. You just need it to be sort of cool, like tap cold. That's what I would call this. Imagine your washing machine. It's got like 10 different temperatures you can choose. Tap cold being mixing no hot water in, and it's just the cold water coming out of your tap. That is the level of cold that I would recommend for a woman who's cold plunging. And you don't even need to fully plunge. What I often tell my clients is finish your shower with one song in the tap on cold. So take your warm shower so that you can like shave your leg and not be bleeding afterwards. But then finish up the shower, turn the tap on cold, turn on your I'm a Badass song, and stand in there for the length of one song, which is usually about 2.5 minutes. And that's all you need. I do not believe you need to get a special device for this where you're plunging up to your neck in ice cold water in order to see the benefits. I just have not seen this supported by data. I do not think we need it to be seriously freezing, like 0 degrees salt water, like you're jumping off the back of the Titanic with Rose and Jack. Does not need to be that cold in order for you to see the psychological anxiety and mood benefits from this. It's not necessary to shock your body that hard. And from what I've seen, that seems to be almost detrimental. And I think it's just that same, like going back to what I said before, that personality, that lifestyle habit that tends to want to be extreme and push things to the limit and thrive on stress, we're not made to do that for very long. And so if you're a cold plunge lady, I would recommend making the water a wee bit warmer and staying in for just a little bit shorter of a time. And that's the cold plunge that I recommend for women who are trying to conceive. It's true that when you're in your luteal phase, your body is deliberately warmer, and so that, I don't know, makes me scratch my head. Like, are we meant to be cold plunging during this time? Would that be a good time to take a break? What about when you're on your period? Should you be getting as cold as possible during that time? I don't agree with that either. I believe that in the luteal phase and when you're on your period, your body is naturally trying to be a bit warmer. So that's where I would say lean into the gentle sauna. Okay, gentle sauna is like 120 degrees for like 15 minutes. Enough to get a good sweat going, but not where your chestnuts roasting on an open fire. We don't need it to be that extreme for you to see the benefits. Okay. So that's the takeaway. Me, as a dietitian who's worked with many women, that's what I took away from this is that us women of reproductive age, we do not need to go into the plunging icy depths, nor do we need to be exposing ourselves to like nuclear radiation, lava fire, hot temperatures in the sauna. We should keep things a little bit more mellow, lessen the time that you spend exposed to these high temperatures, and reduce the overall shift in temperature. So, not as cold of cold, not as hot of hot. and you will see similar benefits without so many of the risks. So that's anecdotal, but that's my 2 cents on the matter. Go to the show notes if you want to read the research articles that I used for this podcast episode. As always, remember to like, share, rate, review, subscribe. It helps other people find us, and it helps keep us going and helping women like you. So stay tuned for the next episode dropping next week, and thanks for tuning in.